Hi, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Screens Playable Theater Wildcard Edition. This is the fifth Wednesday of the month, and therefore we have an extra Playable Theater episode. And I usually pick something weird and wonderful to cover in that episode. And so today we have a really cool uh, a group of people to talk about acting for VR, which is something that I don't think I've heard anyone talk about to date. So I'm hoping we're forging new ground here in this conversation. For those who don't know, Beyond Screens is a weekly show that runs every Wednesday at noon Pacific or 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We rotate between screen, off screen, and hybrid topics. The first Wednesday we do escape rooms, then we do big games, then we do alt control, and then the first Wednesday is usually the Playable Theater show, and we rotate each week. And the shows are super fun. Sometimes we have hands-on demos of alt control games. A couple weeks ago, we had a tour of a Society for Creative Anachronism event. So it's a hodgepodge of things, but if you turn on at this time, you're not going to see a streamed video game. That's the one thing I can guarantee. So anyway, I really want to welcome our guests. I'm super excited. I want to thank you guys all for coming on such short notice because I know it was kind of quick. And what we've done is we've brought together a group of people who have done multiple at this point. I mean, all of you have done multiple VR shows, right? And what I really want to talk about today is like, this is a whole new discipline area, right? Virtual acting is a thing that we're in, like, my sort of slogan for Playable Theater right now is building the plane while it's in the air. So we're literally inventing this. Like, you guys are inventing this discipline like right now. So I'd love for each of you to just briefly introduce yourself and talk about it, just briefly mention some of the pieces you've been in so the audience can know, like, if they've, possibly seen your shows. And then I want to just mainly have a pretty open discussion. I have a few questions, but I think it'll probably just take on a life of its own. So, Braden, why don't we start with you, since you're the kind of social hub of this group that I got to everyone through. You want to just give us a little summary of some of your VR performance, and also like what other, because most of you do other things besides just acting. So go for it.
Absolutely. I'm Braden Roy. I'm one of the co-founders of Ferryman Collective. Our prior works include Para, our first one, which was kind of a sci-fi haunted house that we did last October, and then Krampusnacht, which followed in December, which went on to be nominated for the Producers Guild of America Innovation Award. And then our current production is Severance Theory, Welcome to Respite, which had its premiere recently at Tribeca and has some other things in the works, which we can't talk about right now. In terms of my duties for the first two productions, I was the writer and co-director and co-producer, in addition to doing illustrations and social media, and we all wear lots of hats. And then for Welcome to Respite, I'm a performer. I assisted with VR adaptation and producing and some asset creation and yada, 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 yada. And then also I'm working with a separate team out of Fifth Wall Forum on a project called En Route, which isn't VR, but is spatial web with 30 live audience members and live actors. I think that more or less covers it. I will throw it down to Deirdre and Steve, whoever wants to go first.
I will go first. Hi there. Hi, I'm Deirdre V. Lyons. I started working in VR. Actually, I started in immersive theater first. And one of the immersive theaters that projects did was a very big, well-known show called The Willows, which was turned into a VR experience in the Amaze app, which can be seen in on Oculus's Amaze app. And then through immersive theater, I came to work on The Underpants as one of the actors. And after that was in The Tempest by the same studio, Tender Claws, who does amazing work. They have their own app that you would download, and you would either go into The Under Presents or you would get a ticket for The Tempest. The Tempest had 11 actors. All of us each had our different shows uh, about the Tempest, but our own sort of takes on the show. While I was doing that, I reached out to another company called Double I Studios and was fortunate enough to be cast in Finding Pandora X, which was at the Venice Film Festival last year and won Best Immersive Narrative Experience, and for which we were very excited. And it was really exciting. And that's the production that I invited.
Was that a VR?
That was actually in VR chat. So I invited Braden and Brian to come and see a dress rehearsal before it went live at Venice. And that was sort of the inspiration that said, hey, you can actually do live theater in VR using a social platform like VR chat, as opposed to building your own app, which is what the Under Presents did.
Yeah.
So after Finding Pandora X, which is still playing, by the way, you can see it if you follow them and sign up for their newsletter. We'll be doing some more shows in July, so look for those. It's a lot of fun. It's immersive theater in virtual reality, and then we did Para. I was in Para, Krampusnacht, Welcome to Respite, mostly producer and performer on those.
Hi, I'm Stephen Butchko. As I am married to Deirdre and I live with her, our experience kind of follows down the same pathway. I also am an immersive performer inside, outside of virtual reality. I auditioned with Deirdre for the Under Presents, and I was hired. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that at that point because of scheduling conflicts with other things I was doing. But about the same time that she and Brian Tull and Braden started talking about producing in VR, I became available. So I have producing experience along with Deirdre, so I jumped on board. And since I have become a co-founder of the Ferryman Collective, along with Deirdre and Braden and Brian. And my first project producing and performing in VR was Para, and then I participated in Krampusnacht, and now Welcome to Respite. So here I am.
I guess that just leaves me.
Whitten.
I'm Whitten Frank. I had an education in traditional classical theater. I went to Carnegie Mellon for my undergrad and Lambda for my graduate degree, both in performing and acting. So when I got hired for the Under Presents with Tender Claws, which is how I first met Deirdre, that was actually my first experience with both immersive theater and VR. So it was kind of a trial by fire. But I have a lot of experience doing emceeing for shows. I moonlight as a DJ, and one of the jobs of a DJ is to MC and announce and make everyone comfortable. And a lot of those skills came in handy when I was learning the art of immersive theater. So then I was also a part of the Tempest as well with Tender Claws. So doing this really incredible first, really, of what could theater look like in VR? What could live performance look like in VR as a more structured state, as opposed to the kind of surrealist madcap world of the Under Presents? And it, I would say it was a real smashing success and an eye-opener for a lot of people. And then after that, Deirdre asked me to be a part of Para, which was very fun. And then she and I started developing a couple of other scripts for theater in VR. No spoilers yet, but we'll see. And through that process, she invited me to become a part of the Ferryman Collective. And then I was a performer and the sort of marketing overseer of Welcome to Respite, which we, as you know, brought to Tribeca and are now seeing where else it can go.
Yeah, it's really it's a whole new world, right? I want to share a couple quick things just from my own background, because I think it's interesting. So I back in the 90s, I worked on VR stuff. I made VR like on flight simulators basically, and like refrigerator size supercomputers. And one of the pieces I made had a live motion capture performer in it. And we mostly just ran it at conferences, but it was meant to show real-time live motion capture, which in 1995-ish or 6-ish, whenever we did it, was actually like unprecedented. And I worked with this fantastic actor, and she talked to me about what it felt like to inhabit a virtual body, and how when she said it felt like putting on a costume when she could see herself in real time on the screen, and once she was inside the body, she changed her personality. It was amazing to watch because they put all this stuff on her, and then they push the button, and there she would be in this totally. It's sort of a little bit of puppeteering. It's also almost like a costume. So we were talking before we came on a little bit about masks. So I wanted to start with this. It's kind of almost a primeval idea, which is that acting is a fundamentally embodied craft. And in all my work with theater people over the last few years, and I'm a theater noob, so bear with me on this. Everyone always starts everything with something embodied. Like you go to a theater group, and the first thing they do is physical something. Lie down, take a breath, feel your feet on the floor, whatever. I mean, you guys all know what I'm talking about, right? So, and I took an improv class a couple summers ago, and so can we talk a little bit for starters about like what is it like to do this fundamentally embodied craft with another body that's an extension of you that you inhabit in a different way? I just love to hear, like, I know this is maybe cutting too fast to the chase, but it's like the thing that interests me most because I've seen people do it in amazing ways. I want to hear a little bit about you guys' thoughts about that.
I mean, without diving too deeply into it, like you hit the nail on the head. Definitely the first thing in VR, whether you're acting or just experiencing something in general, is acquainting yourself with your new body and how it moves and how you can interact with the world and those around you, and kind of getting a sense for how to walk again, like a child in a sense. Everything that you go into will give you a different body, and the way that it interprets your virtual body versus your in real life body is almost always going to be slightly different. Some might be closer to one-on-one, one-to-one with what you're doing in real life with like full body tracking and that sort of thing. But oftentimes it's an abstraction of sorts where maybe you don't have arms, or your hands are not reflective of a human hand with the same number of fingers or different size, shape, and the way that your body moves with your movement in relation to the different things that it can't track. Like, your elbow, it has to kind of figure out where your elbow is from the relation between your hand and your head, and figuring out how that moves and becoming comfortable in your own digital skin is very much the first part.
Whitney, you look like you really want to say something.
Oh, I was going to add when he was saying, sometimes you don't have hands or things. You also sometimes don't have facial features, depending on the avatar or human facial features. And so I think the idea of both masks and puppeteering become very, very applicable. It's funny, when we were doing The Under Presents, a very sort of arcane type of theater training to me ended up suddenly becoming very relevant, which is you actually do mask work in traditional theater training, and you spend a lot of time doing neutral mask, which is a very strange concept. It's really the idea of stripping back movement and everything that is different into the bare minimums of human movement. And you're wearing a mask that is this sort of blank, and the whole idea is like, what would a body devoid of any individualism or anything, like just a human physical body, do if it was this shape but completely new. And how would you communicate that? So like stripping everything back to the barest communication of physical movement, which I think becomes very useful in VR, because suddenly, like mask work, a tilt of the head,
Mm.
a slight incline, becomes very fraught with meaning, because we don't have the usual indicators of human understanding and physical contact. So suddenly, as a performer and as an audience member, you have to rely on a whole different subset of physicality and communication and subtlety. So that was sort of my long.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that it invokes some more traditional training. That's super interesting. It also made me think of some of those forms like aren't there some Japanese forms of theater where you have like sticks for arms and stuff like that? So that idea of extending the body somehow with either analog or digital technology.
Kabuki
Sorry,
theater.
Stephen. Yeah, kabuki. Exactly. Exactly.
And no
Sorry,
theater.
Stephen. Didn't mean to cut you off. I just was thinking about that, the traditional aspects and how that can be invoked.
Oh, for sure. I was just going to add to what Witten and Braden were saying, that it's complicated further in VR, specifically with regard to Welcome to Respite, because the avatars that we're sort of embodying do have some rudimentary facial ability to emote and express through our with our faces. However, if you want to smile, you don't just smile, because we don't have face tracking components in our machinery. That's all done through our hands, through triggering. So it's one added thing that we get to learn, is how to smile and frown using our hands through the controllers, and then
Wow.
doing a lot of standing in front of a mirror in virtual reality is really helpful, to Witten's point about hearkening back to the mask work that we do as performers, and learning how each avatar is built a little differently, and so how does that work, and how to make that move naturally, is something that it's good to take time for us to do, because it makes it more naturalistic.
Well, just to add, practicality wise, we're mostly using just our heads and our hands. We don't have much tracking, so everything is more like upper body work. And yeah, standing in front of the mirror is really helpful. I spent hours in front of the mirror for Tempest. Hours. Yeah.
So this is actually great, because it kind of leads me to my next question, because again, I guess the puppeteering is an interesting one, because you were talking about smiling, right? And with the puppets, you smile with your hands, right? So I'm curious, and I know you might not be able to say too much. I know I don't know if you guys know this, but Samantha Gorman is my colleague at Northeastern.
Yeah.
I actually kind of recruited her, and I know that the acting rig for the under is just a regular Oculus system, right? You just use the same gear that the audience is using, but it's programmed to essentially track your input somehow. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, like, what is it that you're doing? Like, what are you seeing? What are you feeling? What input are you, like you were just saying, Stephen, you're smiling with your hand, basically. So like when you're doing the performance, and I did Tempest. So we talked about this earlier. One of you guys was my actor. You're in your house, is that right? And you've got the Oculus Quest and the hand pieces. Is there any other gear involved, or is it just that stuff?
It's just those things, but we actually operate on a slightly separate build. I don't think I'm giving anything away to say that, than the player. So the version of the under that you sign into is different than ours. We have a sort of an admin view of things, and are able to, yes, we're just using the same equipment, but our equipment is linked to a series of programmed directions and things like that. So everything that happens, we're actually controlling. So as we move through the scenes, we're controlling that. We're controlling the cues and the music and the lighting. This happens in the under as well. So
Oh,
it's
so you're basically the stage manager
yes,
while you're acting. Oh my God,
yes.
that's a lot of cognitive load.
Yes, so I was going to say one of the hardest things about being a performer in VR is that the most effective ones, I think, are where you are both performer, in the moment director, and stage manager, as well as behind the scenes runner. You know, you are you are backstage runner as well because you're in charge of your own props per se.
It's kind of like that street busker, that one man band that plays a guitar and a drum and a harmonica, and then
Yes.
has a theremin and
Mhm.
a washboard and does it all at one time. That's kind of what. And on top of it, we get to bring a performance to life and connect with an audience emotionally.
And the audience can do stuff. So you
Yeah.
have to respond to that. Like that's the other thing that's a whole other thing we're going to talk about in a minute. So and obviously the controls you have are going to be different from what the player or audience member has. So can you talk a little bit more about that, like the whole idea of smiling with your hands? So like you were talking about moving your head a little bit to the side, like that's obviously the head tracker probably has to do something with that, but then, or maybe not.
Yeah,
Um,
we are using the exact same
Hardware.
hardware as everyone at the moment.
But
Uh,
they've developed but they've developed a proprietary interface for you
yes,
using that same hardware.
yes. So uh, it was definitely a weird experience to be pretty much, other than tech support, essentially on your own as a performer. And any sort of split second calls you just have to make. If something goes wrong, there's no one really right there to be like,
Wow.
okay, do this, here's your line. You are really, it's pretty raw, actually. You are really exposed, like doing a one person, well, it is doing a one person show or doing stand-up comedy. You know, you're really the master of that. All right, I'm going to use Tempest, master of your own ship here.
Yeah, yeah.
That was
Well, the
that,
other
that,
I
that
was
was
going to just I
oh,
was
so,
just going to say in Tempest in particular, and I've done the shows I've actually done as an audience member are Tempest. I've done the Time Ship as far as I could go without being nauseous, and then I've done uh, Respite in two installments also because I get really bad sickness. But in Tempest, the environment is changing while you're in the middle of the piece. Is that do you trigger those changes yourself?
Yep. Yes,
Wow,
we do.
that's incredible. So you're like doing real time 3D animation. Yeah, it's like a Wizard of Oz kind of a thing, isn't it?
and then on top of it, we also have um, and it's maybe not so much for you guys when you're doing the Tempest and the Under, but when we're doing our shows in VR chat, we also have a Bluetooth earpiece in, and we're connected to the Discord on voice channels to our other teams so that
Yeah.
we're performing. And if we have to, we can mute and communicate with somebody if we're having a problem or if we need to
yes.
do something. So there's an added element to that.
Yeah,
But
for
So
both.
it's like the
Some,
sort of back of house earpiece that
yep.
people in theater often have. Yeah.
exactly.
De-
I think,
de-
Braden, you were going to mention something else about the track.
yeah, depending on the situation, it can be in addition to, making sure that you're muting on one side and unmuting on the other and switching back and forth.
Yes.
It can be more complicated than that. For our last show, Krampusnacht, for each show, I had a headset on. I had volume in one ear going to the headset so I could hear what was happening in the world on the other, the Discord. But then I had a third headphone that was connected. that was
To
connected
your third ear.
to a Zoom. And then while wearing a headset, I had a computer pulled up so that I could email people, and also an iPad pulled up so that I could do different sound effects on the fly all at the same time.
And he had to walk the dog occasionally too. So
Mm.
how he does.
But yeah, it's definitely something that you learn to do, but having the flexibility of being in control once you have it down, of being able to set your own cues and make things go off in time to fit the organic nature of the live performance. Because I mean, it's not on rails. We have the audience members in there that are talking interacting in real time and can make things go completely off the rails or take longer or shorter or what have you. And being able to know, okay, we're going to talk for a while, we're interacting, I'm going to let this audience member pave the way forward, and then once we bring them back or repivot, then having the moment go off as intended when it's intended. So it's empowering after you have it down, but it takes some doing.
Yeah, in both of those shows, I really felt that, first of all, they were super intimate. They felt really intimate to me. And in Tempest, I think there were just a few other people in the audience members, like maybe 2 or 3 other people. And the premise of it, I really liked the premise of it, of like, okay, and I don't know if it's different for every actor, but it was, oh my God, it's COVID, I have to practice for a show. Can you help me? And suddenly we were helping the actor. And really the actor was just sort of bossing us around and telling us what to do, but it still felt like we were helping the actor. Like it was very easy for me, especially as a LARPer, to sort of jump in and go, okay, we're here to help. In Respite, what was really interesting, I loved the scale shift. I'm a big fan of scale shift in digital games. And that was a situation where I went, as soon as I realized I was in a child's body, I went, wow, this can only be done in VR. There's no other way to have this experience. And the way that the actors, which I think, Braden, were you one of the people in mine?
Yes, yeah, I played your dad.
and it was set up so that it was made clear to me right away that I was a child who obviously had some kind of problem, emotional or intellectual challenge that I was dealing with. And that sort of set me up to be able to not know what I was doing in a natural way, like being shy and awkward and clumsy and all of those things, and reluctant to do things and all that stuff that was really more the product of being this new body. But it fit diegetically with the story, which I really liked. And then you guys were so like, because you were the parents and there was this whole nurturing aspect to it. Alex, I think, was the kid's name. Is that right?
Yep.
So you were like, come dance, or here's your cookies, or there was a sense of like almost a nurturing, coaxing kind of aspect to it, and it was just felt super intimate and super like emotionally intense, even though we weren't in the same room together. It really, to me, it was like, I think those experiences, both of those experiences, I felt in both cases like, oh, this is super, like, this is real theater. It feels like a real experience. And the fact that I can do something and that the actors are responding to what I'm doing is also, it's really playable in the sense that we mean when we talk about meaningful agency.
Absolutely.
So that's a segue to sort of my next question, which I really would love to explore a little bit. Like, if, the traditional idea of theater, it's cliched, but it's what we all know is this fourth wall, nary shall be crossed over. Actors do not talk to audience members. Members are not allowed to talk to actors. I saw Dave Chappelle last week, and the audience was very aggressive to the point where he was like calling security guards and like, that's enough. Like, he likes the participation up to a point. But I really would love to hear a little bit more about, like, that's really to be in a situation where not only does the audience have agency, but they're supposed to do something. What is that like for you as actors? It's scary. It's kind of dangerous. I'd love to hear that. And also, if you have a story about a particular great thing that happened around audience agency and a sort of particularly awful thing that happened.
I mean, I think I do want to say briefly that the idea of the audience being a passive viewer is not, it's much more of a modern thing, right? If you think about Shakespeare and Greek theater, the audience actively, aggressively participated through things that actors, and, I'm not advocating for that, but
it is a new idea, though, the passive. Yeah.
Yes, I do think it's interesting, the fourth wall sort of coming in as both a protective layer for the performers, but also perhaps something being a little bit lost there, in that
I,
wall coming down.
I went a couple of years ago. I was invited to a workshop at Punch Drunks. They had like a studio in London, and we were having a conversation about this very thing. And we were talking about Shakespeare, and then one of the people said, and then Wagner turned the lights off. And I thought, yeah, like the audience was suddenly in the dark, right? And that sort of, to me, that was such a simple, like technological idea that like, okay, now the audience is in the dark.
Yep.
And it's a whole different experience. So you're right. I mean, I feel that way about a lot of forms. Like when people talk about multiplayer games, I'm like, yeah, games are multiplayer until the computer. Like it's not a new idea. It's the whole idea for centuries. So yeah, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Like where, what is that like? You're in there, you're playing a character, and then what happens? The audience does something like how I know audiences will feed you as, you're looking in their eyes as you're on a stage, but like if they can do something, what does that mean to you as far as?
I think really early on, you talked about intimacy, and we've talked about this quite a lot. We found in the Under Presents that a hug in VR, very simple human communication, was super effective emotionally and physically. People loved it, and you think you're not even it's not real in some, but it is. That was sort of the first that for a lot of us performing, I think, and Braden as a participant, I think you can answer this. Uh, we were surprised by just how emotionally connected and intimate a gesture like that felt in VR for both the performer and the participant. And so that really got us started, I think, starting to really understand like, oh, wow, there's a lot that can be done here, particularly in the Under Presents where the avatars don't even really have eyes or faces. So it really is all vocal and physical. Just how much could be communicated from between performer and participant and things like that. And it was pretty magical. I played a character who was a Russian psychic, Masha, and she doing cold readings in VR is a whole different level of that. And I actually worked with a friend of mine, Jamie Ian Swiss, who's a magician, and he does a lot of cold reading stuff, mainly to debunk it, as he's a skeptic, but he talks about it. And so he worked with me on sort of how one approaches that. And there was one time when I was giving a reading, and basically I did this thing where I had them toss a stone into some water, and then I said something about what that meant, and then I held their hands and I sort of looked at them and then said what I thought about them. And this person did not want to sit still. They wanted to run around the space. They wanted to do all these things. And so as the Russian psychic, I was like, oh, well, it seems to me you are someone who does not like to follow the rules. You do your own thing. And it was just purely because they didn't follow the rules. And I had popped on the Discord right after that, and they were sort of effusively going, oh my God, Masha said this thing. She knew exactly who I was. Were very, very excited. It was so lovely to have that as a performer, that instantaneous feedback. So it can go to these really beautiful, wonderful moments of connection. And then early on, I would say there were some interactions that were unpleasant because people were still figuring out, what does sexual harassment mean in a VR body? What is that? And so I think we did have some moments of that, not as many as you would think. And the majority of the players in the Under were very protective of the performers. So if someone was behaving badly, they would actually aggressively tell them not to or surround them. And because they were very protective of us, because I think a lot of people who got to see the live performances in the Under understood how special it was and how unique. So that was, there were those moments. There were some negative things, but overall, it's pretty beautiful. And you, as a performer, you get to react very honestly as the character. because you see them do something silly and you go, why are you doing that? And they'll do something, or they do something sort of bad and annoying, and you go, would you do that with your mother? I throw an onion at you. There, you get onions. Just like my mother used to throw at me in Russia, and you just kind of like go off. So it's really fun as a performer, I would say, and at its best, it's truly lovely.
Absolutely.
Scale, bringing you down to a child size, and what that felt like. We were all children once, and Witten talked about hugging. It's like our mind kind of harkens back and fills in those memories, and our body remembers what it felt like to be a kid. So you shrink your down to 7, and look.
I remember when she said that. I was like, I remember when you guys hugged me. Yeah, I remember that. It was really powerful.
I liken it to almost like a phantom limb syndrome. Some people that are amputees, sometimes they still, like, they lose a leg, they'll wake up and they'll feel like their leg is itchy, but they don't have a leg. And that's our minds always want to fill in the gaps and complete the puzzle. So just by doing that, the movements in VR with that intention, with an audience member, it strangely seems to work. And that was one of Deirdre's, that's how the whole Welcome to Respite thing came about, is after, when we were starting to tie up Krampusnacht, Deirdre, because she was involved with the physical production of Welcome to Respite when it in 2019, because it first came to the world as a physical piece, and she just kept she kept thinking about that and telling me that we should really talk to Lindsay Scoggin, who was the creator of the initial piece, because Deirdre thought that it would translate well based on what she had learned from doing the Underpresents, is that there's moments of the connection and intimacy that she thought that would be very adaptable in VR, and then also along with the ability to do the scaling techniques and stuff that are otherwise either impossible or just not feasible for folks like us outside of VR.
Absolutely.
Bill, do you want to?
Just real quickly, in terms of the audience participation and agency, and how we as actors or performers, or even just as creators in general, pivot to allow for that and encourage that and guide it. I guess at its core, every piece of media or storytelling or game or experience that's meaningfully created by someone, be it an artist, a writer, or whatever, is at its core a conversation between that creator and the audience, which then later consumes it. Now, due to the live nature of this, it's very much a conversation that is happening in real time on several different levels, both directly with the actors themselves, or the characters rather, and also the deeper meaning of the writing that initially happened that kind of lays the bedrock of that experience. And because of that conversation is happening in real time in that respect, at least on one level, it's very much a collaborative experience where we're kind of interweaving the story that the audience member is creating with us, while also acting as kind of bumpers to keep things on rails if they go too far, but being gentle and not breaking things out of immersion as we can, and saying yes to the different things that the audience bring. And sometimes that can present some very interesting emergent moments, like for Welcome to Respite specifically, every Alex is different. Some are very quiet and reserved, and some, just by their voice alone, you can tell immediately revert to like a childlike state and are very sweet. And then others are like, I'm a 7-year-old. What stances am I going to take? I'm going to be the troublemaker. And then you have to deal with it in a very grounded way of how these parents would react in this moment.
Really, yeah.
So it's a lot of fun, honestly, and it can be scary and intimidating, but to me, it's my favorite part because it's just inherently exciting and kind of captivating.
it's funny when you guys are talking, I was thinking about two things. One is I do a lot of LARPing, and that what Whitman was talking about like integrating unexpected things, and I do that regularly. Like the first time I did a vampire LARP, I had just had surgery, shoulder surgery, and I had 2 scars in my arm, and so I just told everybody that was my bite, and that I was a new vampire, and I just shown up in this place without knowing what I was supposed to do, like, or yeah, things like that. It's fun to do that, to sort of lean into it. It's uh, and you mentioned, Braden, yes, like the classic yes and thing is something we always learn in LARPing. And it sounds like some of that is yes anding the audience as well. The participator. We have to come up with some new words. Audience doesn't work, right?
You definitely, yeah. And for what we're doing specifically, it's such a mouthful trying to get like, okay, immersive theater, VR, live, like come up with a new
Right, yeah, we'll have to figure out some. I mean, I say we collectively because I think we're all. I was saying this before we came on. We're all building the plane while it's in the air. So,
Right.
but the other thing that I was thinking about was virtual worlds. And I'm, sort of known as a virtual world scholar. And one of the findings that I had in some of my early research was that um, third person people felt more embodied when they could see their avatar than when they had been in first person in the same world, because they had a sense of proprioception. And some people even use that word. They're like, when I was in first person in this world, I didn't know where my body was or where my limbs were, but when I could see myself, I knew. And people talk about the feeling of hugging another avatar, and the fact that you can the emotional impact of that, you still feel it even though the body is projected outside of yourself. It's fascinating. I think
there's an interesting phenomenon with VR, and I imagine it probably applies to things that are third person as well, like Second Life people that grow to see their avatar as an extension of their own body.
Yeah.
A phantom touch, like at the most basic, it's like when you experience a hug, you kind of get the sense. You might not physically feel it, but your brain fills in the gaps. However, a phenomenon that's kind of started arising, and we still don't know too much about it, I don't think there's been proper studies on it, is phantom touch, where within virtual reality, even though people, for instance, they don't have any way of having tactile feedback on their arm, and it's not linked directly with their body, they spend enough time in that avatar and view it as their body that if someone comes by and touches that elbow and they see it, they feel it on their elbow. And invasion of space becomes a whole new concern, because you can go up and make those people feel very uncomfortable because it feels as though they're actually being touched by a stranger. And that's it can be a powerful thing in the form of hug and have feeling presence, but as is the case with humanity historically, there's always going to be some people that are not too great about it, but it's still very fascinating.
Yeah, Witten was reminding me of, I actually did some consulting for PlayStation Home, which was PlayStation's virtual world. And there was a type of sexual harassment that was very unique to that platform because of a particular affordance, which was if you were a female and you sat down, some guy would come up and lap dance on top of you. And it was because of the way the avatars were designed and how they programmed the collision. And it was awful. Like it happened to me. I literally was in there 30 seconds the first time, and just immediately someone started doing this to me, and I was like, get away from me. But yeah, it's not, you still feel violated even though it's a virtual body, right? Yeah, the harassment thing is interesting. I think that I suspect, I'm just going to hypothesize here, and you guys might be able to help me out in thinking this through. I think different cultures, and this is another thing that I study, like different demographics and different cultures behave really differently. So I found that in communities that were fairly equally divided between men and women, and also communities that were older, the incidents of harassment were almost unheard of. Like basically, once you even up the gender distribution, and if you go like into the baby boomer demographic, I studied this group, it was half women, half men. Most of them are over 40. One incident in 18 months that I studied them of harassment. One. And it was a 10-year-old boy, and they kicked him out.
That sounds right. Anytime that we go into VR chat in a public world, it's like the fifth ring of hell for me.
Yep.
Like just, hordes of 10-year-olds come up and curse at you and God knows what.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I feel like the theater audience from I've been in a lot of online theater events in the last year, and I am always amazed at the fact that I am usually the youngest person, and I'm not as young as I look, but like most people who go to theater are like retirement age and older. I don't know if those are the same people that are coming to virtual theater. I think that the advent of online theater over COVID has introduced a whole younger audience to theater that hadn't really been coming to physical theater. Would you say that's accurate?
I've seen two different phenomena. On the one hand, the community around the underpresents is largely a very young community with people in their mid-teens, but of course some older
Really?
people as well,
Huh.
that are experiencing that sort of thing for the first time, as many people are since it's so new. And just having that build up as a community and something that's very important to them. But on the other hand, we send out a survey to each audience member after they go through our shows like Welcome to Respite. And we've actually found that the age range, we were expecting to be quite young, having the underpresents as our frame of reference, but it's actually skews older with over like close to 75% of our audience over 30 and something like 25 being over 45, which isn't unusual, but it's just not exactly what we had anticipated due to the nature of it being virtual reality. But that's been kind of fascinating.
Well, virtual worlds, actually, non-game virtual worlds, I've also done a ton of studies on, have a radically different demographic from games. Like Second Life is 60% female.
Wow.
What most people are surprised to hear. And I was always like, well, there's a lot of guys presenting as women, but actually the actual players are 60% female. And older players, it skews higher age-wise. Also, the older people are, the more money they spend. And older people are more prone to being involved in creative activities. There's a correlation there because it costs money to be creative in virtual worlds, right? So I want to get back to this thing you were talking, Brandon, about the demo. That's really interesting. I've noticed in Under Presents when I've been in there maybe a half dozen times at this point. When I do run into people, they're super nice and helpful. I mean, there's no text and there's no dialogue, and I think the lack of text is really good. Whitney's nodding. Tell us what you're thinking.
Yes,
that was a conscious decision on the part of the creators based on like Journey, the game where it was collaborative and people didn't speak, a female developer, of course. Like there was when Journey was created, there was sort of a call for these very different style of games and sort of collaborative.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. I think, as I mentioned before, the people who got to come in from the beginning realized what a special thing the live performances and things like that were, and so suddenly you had people. It's like a very almost tribal thing, I would say. Like if a tribe has a specific object that is very meaningful to them and has great power, and they share a joy of it, right? And they share, this thing has all of these things. We almost saw something very similar to that, where the players, for them, it seemed to me that the live performers were like that, where they were like, no, this thing is very special, and we have to protect it and make sure that it stays, because otherwise we might lose it. And so because of that, this wonderful community started to grow up around that understanding. As I said, sort of this tribal thing of like passing stories down. It was like, okay, now everyone has to learn the story of the live actors, and the community was incredible.
Part of the mythology, they're like the elders or the deities of the world.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Samantha's talked about that to me, about how, and I've seen her in interviews talking about how supportive and how sort of nice the Underpresents community is. Brayden, do you want to add?
It's the fact that language was removed, and there's no real way to express yourself in ways that we're used to day to day, or most of us. It results in something very interesting in that it's almost like an ego death, where any facade that a person has of, a mask or a front that they normally wear day to day, be it, the things we don't think about, things relating to our appearance and our gender and our voice and how we present ourselves and trying to keep up appearances, it's stripped away. So you're left in this almost childlike state of wonder. And part of that, which is very interesting, is that it usually, not always, but usually results in a very wholesome experience where rather than these people, you know, multiplayer spaces in video games are typically not the most pleasant. They're people saying slurs,
toxic.
People yelling, but taking that away, those people who might otherwise act that way just organically kind of form this new identity where they don't need to worry about who they're presenting as and can just be this innocent thing.
Well,
and then it's quite interesting. And then there's another component where we have a Discord community which built up around it to allow us to communicate when we absolutely needed to, which that itself was also extremely wholesome. But what happened once the live actors went away is because that wasn't the bedrock of the community anymore, that being within that community, it became much less wholesome, almost like immediately, which I found unfortunate, but also fascinating from the stance that these are the same people that taking away that new identity resulted in it reverting into something that it would normally otherwise be, which is unfortunate. But
I feel like one thing you said that just a light bulb went off over my head. All of the spaces you're talking about, the player avatars have no gender. Journey, Sky, have you guys played Sky?
Yes.
And the Under. So like once you take gender out, that just eliminates a whole bunch of shitty behavior without doing anything else. And then if you make the characters more abstract, like Whitten was talking about, like, basically you're just a sphere on a cone, right? And the Under presents basically, then you don't have any bodily affordances, right? You can't lap dance on somebody if you don't have any legs, right?
Well,
I mean, you can. People can figure it out, but I'm just saying that.
Good.
I mean,
yes. No, I mean, we did have someone like bob up and down in front of a
oh yeah, people will figure it out.
Giving head.
Braden to work.
But yeah, I mean, essentially, you're right. Like, there was a lot taken away, but then we also added some things back in, like the ability to give players hats, their ability to create objects with the mask, the ritual magic. And it was fascinating to see, as Braden mentioned, sort of the crafting of new identities within the world and story of the Under, and to see this
right.
kind of being developed, and having everything stripped away suddenly gave people maybe the opportunity to be something closer
to try something
they thought of themselves or what they wanted to be. And it was really...
have you guys heard the term TTP? Do you know what that means? It's used a lot in MMOG and virtual world design. It means time to penis.
Oh, yep.
It's how long it takes for people to make a penis.
Yep.
And I train my students to keep that in mind when they're designing, to prevent those kinds of behaviors. Because I feel like design, part of why that hit a nerve for me is that we can design things, one, to appeal to better people, right? And two, to prevent certain types of behavior without necessarily people feeling like they're being enforced. But also moderation is really key. I mean, we know this from one of the reasons I think most MMOs are so toxic is because they don't enforce their EULAs. They never enforce their terms of service. You sign a 20-page document that you're not going to do X, Y, and Z, and then there's nobody there to stop you from doing it. If we lived in a real world like that, imagine what would happen, right?
But
Right.
also there are the communities like League of Legends where they discovered early on that sort of being negative post a game caused more negativity. So it caused more problems. So they instead of so originally in League of Legends, I think you could like say you could like kick someone or say how they did something wrong. And they
Mm-hmm.
changed that so that at the end of the game, instead you honor a teammate. You the only thing you can do at the end of a game is positive. And they actually saw, I mean, still a totally strange world there, but
Yeah.
I did see a change there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yes, Braden.
Um, Speaking specifically of time to penis, as you know, have crayons in our
Yeah.
world, and it was something we were very much concerned of. Like, okay,
The crayons, yes.
we're putting writing utensils here for our audience members.
Place your bets,
They're
people.
definitely going to draw penis, but not a single one, because
Nobody did.
they revert back, and it's like that the innocence
feel
that
like-
they embody of the 7-year-old, which is also fascinating. Like it's always a childlike picture almost every time. Like you've got the little house and the stick figure and the sun and the green. It's like it's fascinating. And yeah,
There
So-
are, however, some of our dev team are very proficient at drawing anatomy parts.
maybe.
occasionally.
So, guys, I want to say a couple of quick things. We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
First of all, this is by far the highest attendance we've ever had to a live show. There's 44 people right now watching this. So, hi, everybody, and thanks for coming. Also, obviously, these are fans because they're all talking about the shows that you guys are in, and they're all members, probably a bunch of people from, that's fine, we like having you there. A bunch of people from the Underpresents. I'd like to just give a minute to see if anybody in the audience had a question or anything specific that they want to talk about. We only have a couple minutes left, but let's see what they say. Anybody? There's somebody called Royal Tree Puncher who seems very, very talkative. Oh, good. Great listening to your experiences. Royal Tree Puncher is sending us happy faces of, looks like, I don't know who that is. Yeah, thanks to all the audience members for coming. I just wanted to see if you guys had anything you wanted to add or questions or anything like that.
Oh, that I Kill Pigeons, that is someone who works on making more traditional stage plays in a different social app called Rec Room. It's a part of a group called the Orange Bucket Acting Troupe. Bunch
cool.
of awesome folks.
Got to check them out.
Mhm.
Definitely.
So great. Listen, thanks so much for the audience. It's so great to see that active audience. It's one thing I like about Twitch is it just people can talk all they want and we can see what they're saying, but we can just continue our conversation flow or whatever. I want to just mention again to both the people, the Twitch audience, and also to you guys that we're going to be having a Playable Theater Indiecade Summit on October 16th as part of like the October Indiecade programming. So most of that will be like private ticketed, but we'll probably do 1 or 2 Twitch broadcasts from that, which should be fun. And also I wanted to mention to people the Playable Theater project, which is really focusing on people like you, practitioners, people that are sort of in the process of inventing planes while they're in the air, and also trying to figure out like what kind of a common language, like if I mean, let's say for an example, and because I'm a teacher, I think this way, right? If I were going to have a virtual acting class in our theater department, maybe a cross listed with games and theater, Samantha works there, obviously. What would that look like? How would we train? Because obviously, in very short order, the skills that you have just literally invented in the last 2 years, we're going to need to teach more people how to do. So that's a really interesting thing to think about going forward. Like, what is that?
Yes.
What is that skill set?
It would be one thing that we didn't really touch on too much is actually voice acting. And in addition to it being half puppetry of your body, the other half is learning how to really lean into your voice to fill in the gaps that wouldn't otherwise be there. And then because every single virtual reality experience, whether it's a social VR app or something that's made specifically for that, all actors will need to learn how to use that specifically. So
Onboarding.
Yeah, on board.
Onboarding.
Definitely teaching them how.
Unfortunately, we have a hard stop at 1, but you guys, this was amazing. I could talk to you for 3 more hours, and I'm definitely going to have you back for the summit, whether people tell me I can or not. And also, just thank you for doing such fantastic work, because I've actually been in virtual rooms with you all in various contexts, and I've just been so impressed with the skills. And now that you've explained to me what it really entails, I'm even more impressed. So thank you so much for coming and talking about what you're doing. And I look forward to seeing you in some of our other community spaces.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Celia.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for
Bye.
having
Great.
us.
Thanks everyone for